All right, guys, welcome back. This is the end of the world with Michael and Stu.
I'm Michael.
I'm Stu, and today we are discussing a future in which people finally are able to digest plastic. That's right, it's David Cronenberg's Crimes of the Future from 2022.
Yes.
But before we get into that, I thought we would sort of cover an appropriately related news item. This is a article that was in the Guardian on May 20th about how microplastics found in every human testicle in study. You may have heard about this already. It's being it's becoming a bit of a problem. This plastics everywhere situation.
Yeah, like the microplastics discourse has been around for a minute, right? But this new study is showing that what was unknown previously was whether it could also get into the reproductive organs.
And now we know.
The good news, it can.
Yeah.
But I was a little every single testicle, they said, had
Well, but
microplastics.
if you look, it's not like they dissected 100,000 testicles or something. And
No, maybe they didn't get any chads in there. Yeah.
it's only 23 human as well as 47 testes from pet dogs who have been neutered.
Pet
And
dogs. Oh, okay, right, okay. I
not
see
just like
neutered.
wild. These are from like they picked these up from like a vet or
Sure,
whatever.
don't worry. The dogs do have forever homes. They are
Yeah,
just ball.
no,
They are just ballless, which might be good because now they're
well, yeah.
free of testicle-filled microplastics.
Although in the study it says that human beings have a much greater percentage of microplastics than the canine samples they were compared to.
And it does it have an impact on fertility?
Well,
Like
rates of
sperm count?
fertility have been falling for decades, and there's some thought that maybe this is a part of the reason why. But it's pretty early days as far as like diagnosing why that is. I mean,
Sure.
yeah, this is pretty grim. I mean, microplastics are. I was looking at some articles about like how to avoid microplastics. The answer is like good luck.
What
Uh,
about a mask? I hear those are very
well,
popular.
one
Should
of the
we?
things you can do is like use high quality air filters because I guess a lot of microplastics get in. Microplastics are like really tiny. They're not even visible to the human eye. One thing that
Sure.
kind of annoys me is with this article and all the other articles I've seen on this, there's like a big photo of like little bits of plastic, but like the microplastics we're talking about are not like, whoops, like swallowed a little piece of plastic. I found, it's like
Right.
tiny,
Like,
like
what was that? What was that? I think it might have been
yeah,
plastic. Yeah.
right, exactly. But
So
obviously,
what's the articles? It's just air filtration, but it is fundamentally
another thing
unavoidable.
is like don't drink bottled water. Don't use
Oh,
plastic.
really?
Don't use.
Not even Essentia.
No, I don't think there's any brand that's safe.
So
Uh,
the big finding is in order to avoid microplastics while drinking water, don't drink it while it is surrounded by plastic. Is that right?
yeah, but also
Sure.
it's in our groundwater too. So I mean,
Oh,
there's
good.
there's nowhere on Earth we can go and not.
It's sort of in keeping with the theme of the show, right? That there's really nowhere to go, and
That
that's
there are
maybe
these
a fundamental problem.
encroaching,
Yeah.
yeah, these these sort of slowly or tentacles wrapping
Right.
ever tighter
Right.
around our
You'll
human
start to, I
frames.
think maybe you'll start to find like an expat movement, like retirement communities in countries that have the lowest microplastic density per molecule or whatever.
Yeah, I mean, but even so, I mean, we've talked about this. Like, it's in the untouched regions of the Amazon, right? I mean, like
Yeah,
these
sure.
these these particles are. The thing is, they're tiny, right? So they can be carried by gusts of wind and
Yeah.
whatever transatlantic currents are like. And this isn't even like like the Pacific garbage patch, which we may have discussed at some past juncture, which is just this massive accumulation of like plastic waste. This is like infinitely smaller than that. But there's also just like non-microplastic contamination everywhere also. You think we might have thought about this? I mean, for me, like growing up, plastic always felt like the definitive symbol of like post-modernity in a way.
Sure.
I didn't
Yeah.
know that at the time, but like you know what I mean? Because I'd like see my parents. I'd go to visit my grandparents or something and see their toys from the '60s, you know,
Hmm.
and they'd be like, you know, like wood and
Right.
like metal. There'd be like a metal toy. In the '60s, I think is when the turnover starts. Really, you start getting the Barbies, the GI Joe dolls, this kind of plastic like posable action figure type thing. But you know, when you look back in time, it's like the tin soldiers, right? Or like the you know those little plastic rubber, you know,
Right.
rubbery army guys. Um, and it seems like, as in so many other issues, we've just like endlessly produced this stuff, you know,
Hmm.
without any thought for what the long term consequences of it might be. Which is,
Right. And now the long-term consequences are
yeah, the chickens are
that,
coming home to roost, so to speak.
right.
Um,
The sperm count is dwindling, which is nice in a way, if you ever need to like explain to your wife why we can't have kids. It's not your fault. It's out of your hands.
it's
We
not
can't
me,
even see the stuff.
babe. Haven't you
Right.
heard about the
Right.
microplastics? You know?
Right. You're like smoking 2.5 packs of cigarettes a day. You're like, no, honey, it's these invisible pieces of plastic. There's nothing I can do about it.
Yeah, I mean, I have some questions about this study. Like, they compare the plastic found in the dog's testicles to that of the humans, but like these are dogs that are getting neutered, so presumably they're very young. And like,
Right.
how old are the humans? Like, that are have they been exposed to much more because they've lived to be 60 or 70 or something? You know what I'm saying?
Right. And they weren't the testicles were preserved for a while too, right? So they're not just fresh off the chopping block.
No.
Right?
Yeah, I don't know. I don't
So
think
they could
they
have,
probably didn't put them in like a microplastic jar. One would
yeah,
hope. Probably
right.
glass.
I mean, I don't know how any of this works, but I would just assume that any like disembodied testicle would have at least some decrease in sperm count, but I guess
Oh yeah, I mean they don't even test for sperm count in this study. They're just looking at the plastic.
right,
Um,
right. And it's there. It's there.
the plastic is there in every single sample. There are no plastic free human or
So what would have
animal.
to happen? Some men would just have to volunteer to chop one off and then put it in the study and then figure out
I'm
what
not
their sperm.
you know I'm not a scientist. I couldn't tell you what
Yeah,
the
why bother? Let's let the population. Yeah, we don't have to bother with this, I don't think.
yeah it's a mystery, and I'm sure you know we'll never hear the end of this. But I thought this was you know microplastics are the new. Have you heard about receipts? You know about receipts? You know those paper receipts you get at the grocery store or
Yeah.
whatever. Yeah, don't touch them. They're incredibly toxic.
Oh, really?
This is all like sort of fringe health influencer stuff that's been kind of memey over the last couple of years. Like,
Someone on like
yeah, the
TikTok was like,
artist,
"Do not have seed oils and do not
yeah,
touch your
exactly. I
receipts."
mean,
Yeah.
exactly. Yeah, Joshua Citarella, the artist, whose streams I often watch, he
Hmm.
has done a bunch of like self improvement, quote unquote, experiments on himself,
Right.
following some of these guidelines, and yeah, he is the one who introduced me to this like receipts. So now he has like receipt phobia. It's like, oh, here, sir. Thanks. Like, ah, no, get that, keep that back. Get back.
Right. Take that back and go to the hospital immediately.
Yeah, but but I think one of the issues is that just you know we've created a toxic world in which there is no escape, and this film that we're talking about this week is kind of pretty directly like riffing on that idea, right?
Yeah, and more almost in the realm of macroplastics, at
Yeah,
least at the beginning
well,
of the movie for
very
sure.
much
Yeah.
so. So it's 2022's Crimes of the Future, directed by David Cronenberg, Canada's own David Cronenberg, of course, one of
Hmm.
the Canadian legends filmmaking.
alongside Bryan Adams. Oh no, I thought you meant just
No, I like Bryan Adams. I'm
yeah.
very
Bryan Adams is great.
yeah. I'm I think Bryan Adams is wonderful. Yeah, it's Rush, Bryan Adams, David
I
Cronenberg.
can't stand Rush. I can't stand
You're not
Rush.
into Rush, really?
There's a thing that happens with when you live in Canada. So
Yeah,
I
because of like canned content that has to be on.
Canadian content
Yeah.
rules that 50% of everything on the fucking radio has to be Canadian.
So
And
so it's just
so,
like Neil Young, Rush, Joni Mitchell,
right,
like
so you either get really into a band or an artist, or you get really out.
and
It's
this
just
is
too much.
why in part probably the Tragically Hip were so influential because people liked them
Right. Well, it's
and they
funny
were
because
Canadian so they could be
the
played.
Tragically Hip, when Gord Downey was doing his last tour before he passed, I believe one of the quotes from esteemed Tragically Hip fan Justin Trudeau, Prime Minister Trudeau, referred to them as the soundtrack of Canadian life, right?
Wow.
Which is both true and also a testament to the Orwellian nature of Canadian content rules.
I love it. Um, do you have much experience with Cronenberg's earlier films?
Just Crash and Existenz, I believe.
Existenz, yeah. We'll probably have to
Yes.
cover Existenz at some point. That's an old
Yeah,
favorite
let's
of
leave
mine.
that.
Very
I didn't I mean when Crash won Best Picture,
that
famously.
was the other Crash.
Oh, right. The other one. Sorry.
That was the terrible racial examination
Yes,
by
right,
this
right.
Scientologist.
Right. This one won Khan, is that right?
Probably the original Crash. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, it was much more of a art film. It's based on the J.G. Ballard novel.
Right.
Ballard, a kind of, you
Who I'm sure
know,
will come up in this podcast at some point.
oh yeah, I love Ballard. A couple of years ago when I was in Morocco, for a couple weeks, I just walked around Marrakesh and listened to all of J.G. Ballard's short fiction on my headphones. Really,
It's funny,
and
I just got the big volume of the big collection of it
oh, it's
on
great.
audiobook, yeah.
Yeah, he is one of my favorite sci-fi writers. He's like a sci-fi writer, but it's like a little bit more on the literary side and
Hmm.
also a little bit perverse at
Well,
times.
it's a decent place to start. What did you think of Crash? Because I think
Oh, I
we
love
both
it.
agree that
I
this
love it.
movie is sort of a Crimes of the Future is sort of almost a modern update on
Yeah, it's
Crash, I
also
think.
I think it also bears some similarities to some of his earlier films, like particularly like Videodrome. You've never seen Videodrome?
No.
Yeah, Videodrome is similar in that it's also about like he's very interested in these like kind of alternative cultures that are like existing alongside, and I think in Existenz you see that with the video game world, right? These
Yeah.
characters are like um there's the point of that movie in the end is you kind of can't differentiate when the game ends and when reality begins. It's like, are we still in the game, right? And
Right.
in Crash, the subculture is obviously these people who are like erotically fixated on car crashes, right?
Did you find it titillating at all? Not too much information, but did you?
Yeah, yeah. I mean,
Yeah, yeah, me too.
I
Me
get it,
too.
I get
I
it.
get it. I think I
Yeah,
get it.
yeah, for sure. And I,
But it was like
more so than I do the surgery in this one. Like the,
well, this
I
is
mean,
one of the things
I get it,
we'll,
but I
we'll talk
intellectually
about.
I get
Yeah,
it, but it's not as
it's slightly removed as well though from our normal conception of sex, whereas Crash, you can see the leap that's being made,
yeah,
right?
yeah,
But
for
that's,
sure.
I mean, the reason I bring up the movie at the beginning is it kind of feels like, certainly when the Ballard story is written, and to a great extent as well, the movie, it was a time when the car was so representative of
Of
the height
modernity,
of
modernity.
technology,
Yeah,
right? And man as passenger and all of that
I mean,
stuff. And
the great book about that is, of course, The Great Gatsby, right?
The Great Gatsby, right?
That's
And
like the
so,
great novel of the car as this sort of
right.
trope
And
of
and with
modernity.
with Crash, it's like, these people start to, whatever, create this sex cult around car crashes, and And it's interesting because as time has gone on, I mean, how long ago was that movie made? It's like
But
30 years old now.
almost, yeah, it's like mid 90s.
Yeah, that like as the car has sort of become sort of less representative of the current, like, is not considered the zenith of technology anymore. And in some ways,
Well, I
you
mean,
know,
the Cybertruck is.
you're right, the Tesla. I should have spoke too soon. But you know what I mean? Like the idea of the car was so
So
fascinating,
novel. Yeah.
novel and philosophically, picked apart.
And
That
also connected to masculinity in all sorts of ways, and like
right.
the idea of like the car makes the man. Oh, do you have this fancy car because you're compensating for something you don't
That's
have?
right.
Right?
That's
You know,
right.
just
Right, right.
oh,
And so
one thing about the Tesla Cybertruck, a friend told me a new nickname for it, which is the incel Camino, which I thought was pretty brilliant.
that's great. But what's interesting to me is that it's sort of the same. Some of the same notions are brought up again in this movie,
Yeah.
Crimes of the Future. But instead of going to, um, you know, technology or AI per se, he goes to sort of what I think is right, which is that like now the technology, the great realm of technology is the self.
Well,
What
not
in
just the
terms of
self, but like the physical body,
that's
right?
right.
That the
That's right.
body itself is like the site of technological transformation.
Right.
In the form,
Neuralink is on its way, of
yeah, but
course.
also like evolution, like the idea of like moving beyond this stage of our humanity
Right.
into
Right.
some level beyond
And
human.
even in some like lesser, more simplistic ways, it's like headphones, attachments to your body that change your perception and what you're capable of
Yeah,
in your day to
they
day.
make us cyborgs, right? I
Yeah.
mean, people think of cyborgs, they usually think of someone with like a robot arm, but it's like when you have headphones in, or even when you're wearing, as I am, eyeglasses, in a
Yeah.
sense, you're
Yeah.
like you're engaging as a with a sort of through a cybernetic process. You're allowing yourself to experience, to receive messages through the lens, in the case of glasses, quite literally, of a technological apparatus, and that as that capacity increases, as technology increases in its power, you know,
Mhm.
it's probably not crazy to imagine that the human body itself has begun to transform. I mean, you hear
Yeah.
about people who have like iPhone neck, right? From like looking down at the,
Right. So most of these things are considered, at least for now, even the microplastics example, right?
yeah,
It's like you're infiltrated with external technology or your use of external technology, and most of that is negative
yeah,
so far, right?
yeah.
But what's interesting about this movie is it kind of starts to look at the various possibilities of the way the body is going to react, like we said, in a world where there feels to be less and less space between the technological, um, well, obviously, and the industrial and the individual. Why don't you just set up what this world is all about when we get into it?
Yeah, perfect. All right, so we zoom in on this kid who's playing by a crash ship. The world is falling apart. His house, the paint is peeling. Doesn't feel like anything's been taken care of. It feels like the
Hmm.
world, it feels. One thing I really like about this movie is that it feels suitably like like realistically decaying. Like
That's
things
right.
things are falling apart in a way that looks honest. It doesn't feel.
Right. But the story itself's removed enough from the quotidian that you're not constantly wondering how this is functioning or what's going on in any sort of bigger picture.
No, and it's also unclear when this is exactly. It's in the
Yeah.
future, but could be 100 years, could be 50 years, could be 20 years. We don't know.
Yeah.
The kid starts eating the plastic trash can in his bathroom, and his
After he's told not to eat anything, right? Like,
mother comes in and is just appalled by this. She's horrified, and we then see the very upsetting scene of her just like killing the kid, right?
yes, one of the more controversial moments of the film for sure.
Yeah,
As Hollywood does not like showing. the death of children ever.
or animals, right? At
Yes.
least she didn't also kill his like beloved labradoodle or
Probably
whatever.
had that in the first cut, and they were like, absolutely
You've
not.
gone too far this time, Cronenberg. Um, so she then leaves an aggro message for the boy's father, being like, come pick up your creature. Like,
Yeah.
I've eliminated him. And we see the guy come. He's obviously very upset. And his name is Lang. He's one of the sort of recurring figures in the film, play a role later. After that, we kind of cut to Aragorn himself, Viggo Mortensen, who is playing this arc
Saul Tensor.
great
Saul
name.
Tensor. Great name.
And he's with his partner, Lea Seydoux, who's playing Caprice, which is
Yeah.
also a perfect name for her. And they are artists, and he's in some kind of very strange pod that is hooked up to his hands. It's very classic Cronenberg, like Existenz, just this
Hmm.
sort of body horror, inexplicable. The look of it is very like pseudo organic, I think you could say.
Yeah.
Um,
But it's definitely designed in a way that it's not mere functionality, it seems, right? Like it's not,
there's like an
it's
aesthetic element to the way
there's like
it
an
looks.
aesthetic element to it,
Clearly,
right? It's
yeah.
not just like it's not like he's just lying on a computer, you know?
No, not at
Like
all.
I can't quite tell what this is for, but this is what it looks like. And that's the case with a lot of the invention, like the technology, right?
Yeah, and his issue is that his body has begun generating new organs
That
that
is an issue. That would be an issue.
right, that's called cancer, right?
Yeah.
But uh, the human body, we learn, has changed in this world. People don't really feel pain anymore.
Mhm.
These new organs developing for Saul Tensor is like one of the only few remaining areas of like pain. So one of the
Yeah.
things this hookup does is like manage his like pain centers as they develop
Right.
these like twisted new organs. Um, they he also like can't eat. In order to eat, he has to sit in this weird chair that just kind of
Right.
like
But it's like a skeleton
yeah,
design sort of.
it's got this very again the chair even more than the pod is Existenz code. Just
That's right. Yeah.
like the bone gun they find in Existenz.
Sure.
This is all just like classic body horror Cronenberg material. Um, they walk through the streets to go to this office where they register Saul's new organs, and the
Right.
people are on the street are just like cutting each other for fun, and it's very
Yeah, and he's
clear.
not it's just important to know he's not the only person who is able to do this, right?
No. There's other
Yeah.
people, but he's like the superstar organ
Right.
jazz, as we come to learn very quickly.
And when you say artist, it should also be it's performance art that
Right.
involves
They
this
they
stuff.
remove his organs in this performative way in front of an audience of like adoring fans who are just
Yeah,
like
yeah, yeah.
so into it. They go to this place to register, and who's there but Don McKellar, Whippet, and Kristen Stewart, Timlin, no doubt named for relief pitcher Mike Timlin. And they are part of.
It's good to know that you thought that immediately as well. It's like
I,
it's
yeah,
amazing that the Timlin name will forever be associated with the seventh and eighth inning reliever of the Boston Red Sox for the rest of my life. That's comforting.
yeah, there's no escape. Um, they're sort of working in concert with this division of the police called the New Vice Unit, the NVU.
Mhm.
And the NVU are primarily concerned that like people are evolving away from humanity and that something is going wrong and that something about these new organs is insurrectional which
Yes, I love that line.
like there's this political valence to these like new organ havers where it's like
Right, that is constant throughout the movie, but never really made all that
it's
explicit
not
about
harped on.
what the dangers really are. But I guess there is just this notion of like when we don't know, what the human body is becoming, we do not know what is going to
Well,
happen to
one's
society.
reminded a little bit of like the old X-Men, like, oh, they're mutants, they're better than us, we've got to kill them. You know, just like this classic
Right.
idea of like anyone who's developing and becoming new and different is a threat. Just whether
Mhm.
they can shoot lasers out of their eyes or they have a weird new organ that helps them
Right.
do something useless.
But
Um,
then they just remove it.
well, Saul and Caprice do. Like
Right.
they're and that's why they're okay. Like New
Yeah.
Vice is like fine with them doing what they do. Um, and Whippet and Timlin are so excited to meet Saul Tenser. They're
Yeah.
just like, oh my god, it's you! Like,
Right. It's like if we got to hang out with LeBron James
yeah,
or
I mean,
something.
really, like, yeah, basically, it's just like it's, but it's like I find this movie, even though it's very disturbing in a lot of ways, hilarious. Just like
Yes.
the zeal of people's like interest in this organ stuff
Hmm.
feels so over the top, but in a way that is oddly believable,
Yeah.
given what we know about fandom. Um, and it's very obvious that all these people who are into this, or if for all of them, it's sexual, right? This is like a fetish. This is a kink. This is something that just it pushes their buttons in a weird way.
Right.
And
Which the movie is far more about than the practical aspects of like the new Vice unit, really.
right,
Right.
that plot is weird. That we'll get into that in a minute, but like
Yeah.
that feels almost added on or something.
Right.
And
But they put on these shows. So the first show, right, is where he
well, before that, we should talk about the device mechanics that come to like fix their chair, because I think
yeah,
that's
life formware, right?
life formware exactly,
Yeah.
which is like the stuff that Saul Tensor uses to treat his like organ development. Um, and they're like, Mr. Tensor, this bed like really loves your body. they're like, wow, we haven't seen one of these units, and like, oh my god, he has this. Like,
Yeah.
they're as into the tech as other people are into the art or the organ
Right.
stuff. Um, and the Sark unit,
And that aspect is also sexual for them.
exactly. And
Yeah.
this the Sark unit, which was originally an autopsy unit that was developed, is what Caprice uses to like operate on Saul Tensor and remove these like unwanted organs, which she has tattooed in advance with the kind of their name or something. Like
Yeah.
she tattoos something on it, and that like the art piece that results from these performances is like the organ in formaldehyde in a glass jar with a tattoo like
With a
visible on
tattoo.
it.
Right.
And so they invite the Timlin and Whippet to their performance, and Caprice doesn't like them. She's like, they're creepy, like
Yeah, there's
they're
a touch of like jealousy with Timlin. She's like, Tensor kind of likes her,
yeah,
right?
yeah, and they're also it's a little bit of like that thing where you meet someone who's like a little too excited to meet you or something. It's like I'm gonna keep my distance. Like this
Yeah.
person, you know, you and I are both such big celebrities that we have this happen to us all the
No,
time.
that's not true, but I have done that to some celebrities.
Right, I've had friends who are celebrities that I've seen that happen to, and
Yeah.
you get it sort of instinctively. You're like, okay, yeah, this is weird. Like,
Right.
um, so they do their performance, which is in this rundown performance venue where like
Right, but and people are kind of like drinking and hanging
yeah, it's like a
out and
bar.
filming it. Yeah.
Everyone's got their phone out to record their
Right.
cameras
I'm
out to
glad that
record.
didn't stop. I'm glad in this Cronenberg can't envision any way for this to be recorded. People are still so happy with just their phones out, like if they're at a fucking concert, you know?
Exactly, and it's "body is reality" is a slogan that's like plastered everywhere. That's very Videodrome. Videodrome's about the new flesh is one of the sort of taglines of
Okay.
Videodrome. So it's kind of calling back to that. Caprice is like using this weird controller to
Right.
operate the like autopsy machine to cut open Saul and like pull out this hideous organ from him. And then
It
people
looks like
are
a frog, kind of.
yeah, it's just like it
Yeah.
looks horrible. And everyone's into it. People love it. The organ is also giant. It's not like it's a
Yeah.
little like polyp or something. It's like a
Hmm.
giant like liver or something. And Timlin comes up to Saul Tenser and she's like, "Can I ask you something? Surgery is sex, isn't it? Surgery is the new sex.
Just lays it out for
When
us.
when
Yeah.
Caprice was cutting into you, I wanted you to be cutting into me." Caprice is just like, "Get this fangirl away. This is whack. This is not what this is about." And she's like, what did that freak want or whatever? And Saul's just like, art triumphs once again. You know?
Yeah, yeah.
Like,
And he's also just like, I don't know. I thought she was kind of attractive.
um, there's also this character Lang, who's the father from the beginning, who's at
Mhm.
the art event, and we see him eating this purple candy bar, which we don't know him now, but we've come to learn is plastic, and that Lang has had a series of operations to his body in order to make himself able to digest plastic.
Yeah.
And that this is the crime of the title, right? The crime of the future is that this emergence of these plastic eating freaks. And I feel like I've said freaks too many. But in any case, um, the new Vice guy is like on the tail of Lang. And while the party is going on, someone else like takes Lang's plastic bar and like
Just can't help himself for
takes a
some
bite
reason.
of it and then dies.
Yeah.
He's like frothing at the mouth, purple goo is coming out. And there's this detective character who we come to learn.
He's great.
Yeah, he's a good actor. He's he has a realistic attitude towards this in that he doesn't really get it, but
Hmm.
he knows there's something not right about it. And we come to learn that actually Saul Tenser is a mole for this guy.
Yep.
Like he's an informant.
Yeah.
He's helping him to suss out these plastic eating deviants.
Like all great artists. Always
Yeah,
always on the take for the
on
cops.
the payroll of the CIA. You know,
Yeah.
just like yeah, exactly. Um, and one thing we didn't mention is a big part of Whippet and Timlin's obsession is that they believe people are like, isn't just Caprice the artist? She does the surgery and takes out the organ. They're like, no, no, not at all. Saul Tenser like wills the new organ
Yes.
into existence. Um, and the next day he's like, Caprice is like, oh, Saul, I'm getting some, disconcerting readings. The bed says you're already working on a new organ. Like we just removed one yesterday. Like this is accelerating. And he's like feeling very creative. And we see Saul at another show, and this is one of the funniest scenes in the movie. There's a guy doing a dance who's covered
Hmm.
in ears,
Yeah.
and uh, like Saul Tenser seems kind of like, all right, covered. I get it, and he's
Yeah.
talking with this,
Covered in ears, a little overplayed here.
and he's talking with this other artist, and she's like, the extra ears don't even work.
Yeah.
They aren't even functional. They're just for
Right.
show. Like, so if you're gonna have yourself covered in ears, like they have to all be, you have to be like hearing out of
Right.
all of them, or else it's just like the ear guy is like a
It's just
poser.
masturbation at that
Yeah,
point,
yeah,
right? Yeah.
he's just a poser, right? Yeah. And like Saul's like, yeah, I kind of like the dancing better than the ears or whatever. And one thing that's funny is he always dresses like a ninja whenever he goes out of his house.
Right.
Like he's always in all black. He's got
And
his face.
his face is covered. Yeah.
No explanation is given why. Like, is he just trying to avoid his fans? But if so, like that's a pretty obvious like uniform. It's like, oh, that's Saul
Yeah.
Tenser, right? Um, so we later see Saul and Caprice like doing surgery on each other for fun. in lieu of having sex. They're like lying
Yeah.
in the surgery bed, cutting each other. Um,
But it is sex sort of,
well,
right?
it's a substitute. Like they don't
Yeah.
actually have sex, but they get sexual enjoyment out of this
Right.
shared.
And that sort of goes back to the crash thing, right?
Yeah,
Where,
absolutely.
we were talking about this a bit before, but where the crashes in Crash, the cars and the damage then creates sexual arousal.
Yeah,
But then the sex that happens is still sex as one might think of it. Whereas this new development appears to give the results of sex and the feelings of pleasure derived from sex without any interaction with the typical, the genitalia of it all, right?
exactly.
It never makes an appearance in the movie, in fact.
No. Um, Saul goes to visit this doctor that this other artist had tipped him off about, and he's going to enter this event called the Inner Beauty Pageant, which is just like so on the nose,
Yeah, a lot of it's on the nose
but in a way that works
in
for
a fun
me.
way.
It's
Yeah.
funny. Um, and this doctor knows Saul Tenser. He's like, "Oh my God, it's you! Wow, Shaq here in my little tattoo parlor." Like, and he installs this zipper on Saul's belly for the contest, so it'll be easier
Mhm.
for the judges to like access his abdomen or whatever. And Caprice initially seems like what she's like, what's this? Like, this isn't part of our thing.
This isn't what we do. We don't enter beauty pageants, you know?
But then she's kind of like, oh, I guess zippers do have their sex appeal also. We see her like unzipping the zipper and kind of
Yeah.
making out
She
with
like she
his
like goes down on him
by going
in the
into his
yes.
abdomen.
That's right.
Pretty troubling. Um, Eventually, Saul and Caprice are approached by the father, Lang, um, of the child who died in the opening of the
Yeah.
movie, and he wants them to dissect his son in one of their performances. He's the father. He
Right.
has his body give permission. It'll all be legally sound. Because
But he's also hinting at something bigger.
right,
He
this is
says,
this is
I'm going to make a statement
this is
and it's going to resonate.
a
Yeah.
political act, and
How radical are you, Saul Tenser?
yeah,
Are you a real artist?
or are you just one
You
of
know,
those losers?
any artist can say that art changes the world, but are you ready to actually do it?
Yeah,
That type of thing.
and the funny thing is, the son. So Lang had these surgeries to become a plastic eater, and the son was born organically through normal sex with his
Right.
wife, but
So of
somehow
course, as happens with a lot of these movies, he's like a miracle child, right? They can't figure out why.
he's inherited. This
Yeah.
is like, was it Lamarck? Who's the guy, Lamarckian evolution, where he believed giraffes' necks got so long because, one giraffe really stretched its neck to get to that branch, and then the next giraffe was born with a long neck because it stretched. Right?
Yeah.
Like, his idea of heritability was that, like, if you were really buff, like, your child would be really buff.
Right, and
essentially.
Tensor's even like, this doesn't make any sense. Like if you cut your finger off, or your kid's
Aren't going to
born
be
without one
exactly.
finger, right?
And he's like, I know it doesn't make sense, and yet
Crazy, right, Saul?
it happened, Saul.
Yeah.
He goes to visit the mother, who's in prison now, having murdered her son, and she hates the ex because she believes Lang intentionally mutated her son, in order to be able to eat plastics,
Mhm.
and she's like, Lang and his friends,
Which I buy.
all
I buy that.
well, but he didn't. There, this is like the final moment of the film kind of hinges upon this, right?
Right, but like it's not an unbelievable thought to have on her part, considering what he was willing to do to his own body, right?
Absolutely, but he didn't physically
Yes.
have an operation done on the son.
Right.
But it's like this idea that like just like much like Saul generating new organs as an act of will, the son being born a mutant is like an act of the father's desire
Right.
or something. There's a funny line where she's like, he's like, are they cannibals or something? And she's like, well, if you're a Barbie doll, they're cannibals, right? Because they're just like devouring the Barbie dolls. um, and he asks her, what does she think they'd find inside her son's body? And she says, outer space,
Yes.
which kind of harkened back for me to Parable of the Sower. We were talking about this like idea of space as this sort of Edenic future possibility.
Right.
Um, we don't need to go through the whole plot because the plot feels very secondary.
Hmm.
But essentially, they agree to do the performance, and they have ambivalence about it. Um, Timlin, Tensor meets up with Timlin, the office again, and
Also a funny scene because she
she's really,
seduces him
she's really coming on to him. Very,
and it works. And as
uh,
they start making out in a more conventional manner, Tensor stops and says, I'm sorry, I'm not good at the old sex.
just
I
just
love that part.
so hilarious.
Yeah, I wouldn't even know where to start.
Yeah, no, exactly. And Lang tries to get Saul Tensor to try one of the plastic bars because he intuits that what's happening with Saul and these new organs that he is evolving into a plastic eater, and
Right.
that by removing them and by having this complicated food chair and all this stuff, he's sort of resisting the course of his natural evolution.
Right. And
Um,
in the meantime, what sort of helps the ambivalence give way to actually doing the performance is that Caprice is on her own journey too,
she's
right?
like having these horns installed in her
Yeah, so
forehead.
she goes to another show and an artist is having their face cut and she is extremely turned on by this. Um, and in keeping with the world of the movie, being turned on by that means that she too wants to split her fucking face open.
Not that
And
she wants to like hook up with
yeah, and the
someone.
artist is kind of like, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Yeah, you should come to my party after at the hotel.
And then
You really want to get it? We're all hanging out at the hotel after. Why don't you come by?
and instead of hooking up, they put these little weird horns under her forehead,
Yeah.
like, and she's like, "Saul, do you like it?"
And yeah, Tensor's not too
he's
into it,
he's
right?
like, whatever,
Yeah, sure.
do what you like. Um, Meanwhile, the text that we met earlier, we see them coming to the doctor who installed the zipper in Saul and
Hmm.
murdering him. Like
Yeah.
they drill through his neck and head and leave him in his weird feeding chair. Like, and so they're some part of they're either part of the police's anti-evolution agenda or they're another rogue splinter cell. It
Yeah.
doesn't matter. Um, it's just funny that there's like a plot to this.
Right.
like like that
I mean, it does
he's doing
feel
this
sort
like
of that.
investigation.
Yeah, it does feel sort of like he was like, all right, fine, I'll like create some story so I can show this kind of weird shit over and over again.
Yeah.
This basically seems the point. The actual point of the movie is to let Cronenberg like have a few like insane scenes and everyone be like, wow, that's pretty crazy.
Yeah. Yeah. Um
But the reason I bring up the Caprice thing is that this leads her to want to lead the show
yeah.
with the kid, right?
And like Saul is the one who's controlling the
Right. She
surgical
wants to flip it. She
and
wants to
she's
flip it
like
around.
giving a speech
Yeah.
as the process goes on. So they do this. There's a huge audience. Everyone's very exciting.
No,
Um,
it's the show of the season.
yeah,
They're ripping open a
this is
child.
this
I
is
mean,
the this is the Venice Biennale of the organ performance art world or
right. And
whatever.
they're all dressed up like they're at a fucking
Yeah,
ritzy art
like
show.
they're at a Biennale or
Yeah,
gala or
yeah.
something. This is the Met Gala of the. And the kid's name is Brecken, and she's giving this speech about like you know what was Brecken like, um, and they cut him open, and all of his organs that they pull out are already tattooed, and
Mhm.
which implies that Brecken was not a natural mutant as his father
Right.
claimed, but was, already was operated on. And everyone's horrified and upset. And the father is so upset he runs out and then is murdered by the drill wielding maniacs.
Yep.
And it's like, so like we learn in the aftermath that the police got a hold of the body in advance and like did this because they don't want people to know that these mutants are out there. They want to
Hmm.
keep that like under wraps for some reason. And we start to see Saul develop an ambivalence. Like throughout the film, he's been against these new organs. But now, after seeing the way they like manipulated this guy, and then the guy got murdered, the police are like, "We didn't know anything about that." But it's like,
Right.
really, you didn't? They do like a raid on the plastic eaters compound, right? Like, I mean, it's just like,
Yeah, and Tensor starts to seem open to the idea itself, right? Because the guy says to him like, "Oh wait, are you, you've been undercover with these guys, and it seems like what do you think this is real?" And Tensor's like, "Well, if you're truly undercover, a part of you has to believe, then disappears into the night with his like weird ninja cape or whatever."
exactly. And the last scene of the film is him like once again in his like skeleton chair trying to eat like mashed peas or whatever.
Yeah, yeah,
Like,
yeah.
and it seems awful. So Caprice like reaches into a drawer, takes out a box, and has some of those plastic bars like saved.
Hmm.
And you know, he opens it and he eats it. And like we see like a tear drip down his face.
Single tear. Yeah.
and
And we don't know whether has he reached nirvana. We
is
don't
he, or
know,
is he
is he
dead? Does
dead?
does he
Right.
die?
But the goo doesn't come out,
Not
right?
immediately.
So previously in the movie, as is mentioned, right? Like this goo comes out pretty quickly. This guy can't handle what he's ingesting because his body's not built for it, so he dies. And the sort of open-endedness of the ending, right, is that he doesn't do that right away, so but they also don't stay on him, right? So you don't really know what becomes of him having eaten this.
Exactly. And yeah, and that's it. We're left to wonder. Like,
We're left to wonder. But that's the last piece to it, kind of that's that sort of does come up towards the end of the movie is that political side that they sort of mention a few times. It doesn't seem to drive all that much, but when when the father is with his group of people,
yeah,
right?
yeah,
And it reveals this kind of interesting idea, which is essentially that we live in such a fucking techno litter garbage
polluted world
landfill
with the
wasteland of a world
microplastics, etc.
that the humans out of necessity are going to have to start to be able to consume waste in order for the species to survive,
Yeah,
right? And that's kind of like that to me is a very interesting idea, right? They're like, and obviously we're not doing so well with it so far. I mean, if we even can't even, it doesn't even appear that we can just like ward off microplastics,
no,
we can't fucking have kids if we ingest some. But like, and processed foods still hurt. But I one would wonder, if you gave the processed foods that we're eating now to someone in 1920 who had never touched the stuff, are we
would they
far
just
better?
instantly die?
That's right. Would their stomachs just explode, And maybe
Yeah,
we are in a very long-term way, sort of on this path.
yeah. I mean, we certainly are, right? I mean, we tolerate levels of all sorts of substances that would have been unthinkable. We've also reduced the amount of certain other substances. Like people just used to have lead everywhere
Sure.
in their body.
Just chewing on lead.
Just well, this gas. Every exhaust that went
Yeah.
by was just a cloud of lead. Relatively small amounts, but if you're living near the road and there's
Right. And
150,
relatively not too long ago.
no, I mean leaded gasoline was banned in I think the 70s. It started to be
Right.
phased out. But I remember growing up. be like unleaded would be like
Unleaded. Signs everywhere. We
could
got
be,
the good stuff.
and there's that theory. Um, Bill, is it Bill James, the sabermetrics guy?
Yeah. The
He wrote a,
baseball guy?
yeah, he wrote a true crime
Yeah.
book. Um,
What?
yeah, he's obsessed with true crime. Also, it's
The
really
guy
good.
who like was like the Bill James is like the guy who's like on base percentage is really
Yeah,
important.
yeah, yeah, the same guy.
He wrote a true crime book?
Yeah, and
Oh my God.
one of the big theses of his book was that leaded gasoline was responsible for the rise of like serial murders in the like mid to later half of the 20th century,
Oh, I
because
love
those
it.
are the 60s, 70s, 80s, and
Yeah,
early
they were
90s.
everywhere.
Those are all kids, people who were born in like the 40s, 50s, 60s, who lived their whole lives being inundated by lead, and that the crime spike that you see that ends in the 90s and starts to dip and is still dipping with a few, that can all essentially be associated with the prevalence of leaded gasoline, because leaded gasoline is invented in the 20s, and it's because
Hmm.
of an engine knock, right? Like the lead made the the gas get better gas mileage, and also eliminated
Okay.
this incredibly annoying sound. In any case, it's just one example of a very dramatic example of the way these technological developments have all of these unintended consequences that we
Sure.
sometimes don't that in the case of leaded gasoline, it took people like 50 years to ban it, even though it was clear that it was causing problems
Right.
immediately. Like the guy who invented it almost died of lead poisoning.
Right, but these
Like,
things happen. These things happen all the time. I mean, the within 0.5 seconds of seeing the invention of vapes, you could have been like, "Hey, you should probably put that back." probably, probably shouldn't bring that one to market, And now every child you see on the street is just huffing away on like a fucking peach mango raspberry vape. It's like, no, who could have seen this unintended consequence unfolding?
well, I mean, I guess in theory it's better than them smoking, but probably there are other negative side effects that we
Yes.
don't know of yet.
Right, which
Um,
is why this is why I think the idea of the movie is so cool because it's like, like you're using the example of like banning something,
yeah.
right? Like, well, we got to
Well, first
ban lead
first
and gas.
inventing it and then seeing it work in
Right. But
society and
but
then
this
getting rid of
this
it.
idea is that like all of these things that are so horrible
We should embrace
for
them.
us are there we not even should. It's like we have to. That
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
the ubiquity of them has made it such that like trying to do the like take the lead out of the gasoline model on everything that's happening has become we're past that point.
Yeah.
And so like you can't even see the plastics that you're fucking inhaling. So you better be ready to like be able to procreate despite the fact that you're going to be inhaling this for the entirety of your time on this planet.
Yeah, and I think in this way the movie kind of has an accelerationist like
Yeah.
message, right?
Yep.
That we've got to just like embrace these things that seem to be speeding us towards our doom, and
Right.
thereby adapt, or
Yep.
even if adaptation in this case takes the form of like an impossible miracle child who's born with the
Sure.
right organs to um yeah, I like the movie a lot. I mean, I think it's hilarious. Like,
It's very funny and also like it is visually just like you said, the plot doesn't feel it's not great. It's
it's a
very
little
pretty bare
it's a little silly, but
it's a little silly
that's
and it's a
very
little bare
Cronenberg
bones.
too. Like a lot of his
But
movies, the plot is kind of not an
right,
afterthought,
but
but
many of the
secondary.
individual scenes and many of the individual scenes and not just the performance art shows or Caprice and Tensor,
Cutting each
having
other
quote
up.
unquote sex, but like those scenes really can just carry the whole movie. I mean, it is
Yeah.
it is definitely
Well, just the
it's an
rundown world. It was filmed in Greece,
right.
like in and around Attica and Athens. So it's got a very appealing vibe, even though it's
Yeah,
a
it's
very
it's an it's
run
a it's
down.
more of an interesting movie than an interesting story.
Yeah, in this way, it's a little bit like the movies of David Lynch, like where
Sure.
the thing is really the vibe, and the
Yep.
images that you're getting. And in this way, Cronenberg, like Lynch, is more of a true visual artist,
Right.
as more so. Or I mean, he's a storyteller too, but the sort of visual presentation of his ideas is like the vehicle for his main impulses and messages, rather than
Yep.
the tightly, you know, constructed plot or what have you. Cool. So, do you have any other thoughts about this one?
No, no, I really don't. But I do recommend watching it because I mean that's the last thing I would say is that, like, yeah, the things that you're going to remember from this movie are all the incredibly weird looking things. You're not going to remember like the plot twists
Yeah,
because they
I
don't
saw the
really.
movie when it came out in the theaters, and then I rewatched it, and I was like, "Oh right, there's a story." Cool. So, what are we talking about next week? We're doing something a little bit different, isn't that right?
Yeah, we're gonna switch it up slightly in that, while we have recently been doing these short segments, sometimes related to the movie that comes or the content that comes, like the microplastic conversation, we're gonna flip it in terms of our focus, and look at something that it sort of deals with the current apocalyptic scenario in which we are all a part, which is something called last chance tourism, which is a phenomenon that has been building in concert with the degradation of our entire ecosystem. And you can guess what last chance tourism is, but basically it is people who um, have identified, environmentally vulnerable yet beautiful locations that they may have sort of always wanted to see. And prognostications suggest that these places will either be gone or completely inaccessible or dangerous or what have you. And they are now going out in numbers, in increasing numbers, to see these places, which, as we will talk about more next week, is obviously not helping those places and is only speeding up the process. But it's a very funny, if it weren't so serious, but interesting phenomenon that's taking place that sort of speaks to a lot of, I think, what this podcast is driving at, in terms of the way that we are as humans approaching and dealing with these crises. Um, and that's going to sort of occupy much more of the podcast. And instead of the content, the piece of content or the piece of literature or the movie driving the episode, it's going to be in reverse. And then we're just going to talk about one of my favorite bad movies of all time, um, The Beach, which doesn't have much to do with the exact last chance
No, but I
tourism of
think
it
it's
all.
related in as much as this idea of some kind of escape,
Yes,
to a like an like a inaccessible
that's
Edenic,
right. That's
Edenic
right.
vista
The
is.
relation to it is that, yes, and sort of this idea that some travelers have, whether they are last chance travelers or otherwise, that somehow, like, the more remote, the more idyllic, the harder to get to, the weirder, the less traveled, right? To be off the touristy path, sort of plays into the appeal of a place that you shouldn't actually even want to be in, as we will find out.
Although we should also keep in mind the wise words of David Matthews, who wrote,
Always, we should
"It's
always do
it's
that.
not where but who you're with that really matters.
That
That really matters."
that really matters. That's right.
All right, so I think that's going to be great. I look forward to that, and remember to follow the podcast. Follow us on Instagram at End of the World WMS. And until next week, this has been the End of the World with Michael and Stu.
I'm Michael.
And I'm Stu, and we'll talk to you real soon.